It's Friday, November 29th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast presented by Toyota, the official automotive partner of the NFL. And it is a hell of a day to talk ball. And joining me to do just that is my good pal, Andy Behrens. Andy, what's going on, buddy?
Harmon, we had a rough one in week 12. Multiple losses by a fraction of a point in the fantasy portfolio. It was tough. Gotta get back in the facility, break down some film, see what went wrong, and then we're on to week 13. It was a tough one.
You know, it was a tough one for me as well. And honestly, it's not because of, I don't know, won't speak for you on this, Andy, but it wasn't for me because of, the bye week hell or any of that stuff. Actually, some of the bye week hijinks, I'll call it, some of the bye week hijinks that I pulled off actually worked. The problem is that several names I typically count on maybe kind of came underperforming a little bit, which maybe that speaks to the culture in my building. So I don't know. I need to, I think it's less about, let's take a look at the film. I think I need to take a hard look in the mirror and think what am I showing? What am I reflecting? What am I just kind of, what am I emanating throughout the building here at this point?
Yeah, there was a lot of talk that Harmon would no longer be coaching the team coming out of the bye, but here you are. You're still in place. I had a miserable Monday night, fantasy wise. It was just a gutless performance from multiple teams. So again, I'm trying to move forward, but I'm kind of mired in it right now. I'm still processing.
I am still processing as well. Speaking of which, I'm going to pull back the curtain here a little bit. This show's coming out on Friday after Thanksgiving. If you can't tell, we're still maybe a little reflecting back on week 12. We're taping this show a little bit earlier than Friday. Let's just put it like that. All right. I'm not gonna go into any further details. I'm not gonna confirm when this show was taped, what mental state Andy is in, what physical state I am in. We are taping the show a little bit earlier than Friday. Let's just leave it at that. So keep that in mind as you listen to what this preview show is, because it's going to be a little bit different than our normal preview show. And I'm not saying the information will still be reasonable. The information will still be reasonable, but the structures.
Good job not over-promising.
Yeah. Never. The information will still be reasonable. The structure is going to be a little bit different. Andy usually joins the show to give his 3 burning questions, 3 matchups to watch. Tara joins in the back end. No Tara Roberts in this one. She gets the week off for Thanksgiving. She's done enough in terms of dominating our fantasy football live competition. She's done enough bringing great information to this show. She gets the week off, so it's just Andy on this one, and he's basically just going to give us 4 burning questions and 4 matchups that deserve your attention. So more Behrens here entering week 13, Andy. That's just what the people wanted.
I feel I'm kind of geared to 3 questions. So I feel like 3 of these questions are kind of burning, and then I may have lollygagged it a little bit with the 4th.
I would say you definitely milked it on this 4th one, but let's get into it. Let's talk through week 13. And obviously we're not going to address anything that happened on Thanksgiving, because if you haven't figured this out by now, we're taping this show well before Thanksgiving. So, Andy, whatever happened to the Bears on Thursday, you don't have to address it here on this show. The people can just be thinking about you as they're listening to this. All right, so let's get into it.
Let's just assume it was a signature win, a defining win.
Which Caleb Williams touchdown was your favorite, the 5th or the 6th?
Can't. It's so hard to choose. What a battle between Sam Laporta and Caleb, though.
Oh, it's truly one for the Andy Behrens record books. All right, let's get into week 13 here. Let's talk through your 4 burning fantasy questions, and let's get it started with a question about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yeah, this is one that I'm kind of running back from last week, and it's just, what's next for Baker Mayfield and the Bucs. He did not throw a touchdown pass last week, but he ran for one. He stayed pretty frisky on the ground. They were great on the ground all day against the Giants. He passed for 294 yards. Baker is still the QB5 on the season. He is still a pillar of my Superflex plan. Baker playing really well, really fun. Tampa just put up 30 points, 450 total yards against the Giants. They got Mike Evans back in the mix. That's exciting. He needs to average just almost right at 100 yards per game to keep the 1,000-yard streak alive for another year. If Tampa goes to Carolina and gets this win, which, I think we have to view the Panthers a little bit differently after the streak of games that they've put together. But if Tampa goes and gets this win, they will be 6-6, potentially tied with Atlanta atop the division, and a whole bunch of winnable games ahead of them. They got Vegas coming up. They do have the Chargers. They got Dallas. They got Carolina again. They got New Orleans. So we have a real chance for Tampa to finish the season strong. I think that this game sets up as a second straight, blow up spot for Bucky Irving and the Bucs run game. But pretty interested to see what Baker does the rest of the season.
You're right. This is a critical game in a critical week for the NFC South here between these two teams. Talked about this with Nate on 301 a couple of weeks ago where, the fact that the Falcons have 2 games up on the Bucs, almost kind of disappointing that those 2 games are out of the way here. That really should be, that feels like a NBC Week 18 win and in game, Bucs Falcons, but unfortunately we're obviously not going to get that. So you look at the schedule for these two teams, it's definitely a more difficult road for Atlanta than it is down the stretch for Tampa. There, like you mentioned, a lot of winnable games here, a lot of games where this offense sets up really well, including this matchup where I think that the Panthers defense probably had their best pass rushing performance last week. Like we're all focused on Bryce Young and what he did to the Chiefs, and I think we should be focused on that. And I'm certainly interested to see what he can do to this Buccaneers defense that has been so inviting throughout the course of the year. The thing that probably got a little undersold is that the Panthers sacked Patrick Mahomes a decent bit and got in his grill a little. I don't know if that says more about the Chiefs' issues at offensive tackle or the Panthers' pass rush. So still kind of calibrating to that. But generally, this has been a very good matchup for almost anything you want from a passing game, from a ground game perspective. And I love that you pointed out the Bucs run game from last week. It's crazy just the turnaround that's happened here in Tampa Bay. Yeah, the passing game has been awesome. Yeah. But this was one of the worst rushing attacks in the NFL last year, and they're a top 10 unit by EPA per play, by success rate. A lot of that is due to your guy, Bucky Irving, but also some systemic changes by Liam Cohen, throwing some more pitches here, and improvement on the offensive line as well.
Yeah, can't say enough about Bucky Irving. We rave about him pretty much every time I'm on the pod. He's just been one of the most thrilling players to watch. And I don't think, the Panthers are not alone in this, but I don't think there's going to be that much that they can do with him. But man, the Panthers are they're not a layup anymore. Certainly, they've put together some wins, and honestly, the loss that they had, taking the Chiefs to overtime, as impressive as any win that they've had this season. So it's not a gimme. It's suddenly not a gimme. But if they do get past this, man, that division gets so fun.
How are you feeling about Cade Otton in this matchup? Just because, he's a guy that I was really counting on in several spots because I was very much in on the idea that he was going to be the big beneficiary of no Evans and no Godwin. Yeah. I thought and we talked about this, that, he could probably hold his role down while Evans is back there. Just one catch. It was a big one, 30 yards, but just one catch for Cade Otton last week.
Yeah, pretty sizable concern. I too thought that he could survive the return of Mike Evans because we still have Godwin out. There are still opportunities here, and I think he's going to have some weeks. But if you had it in mind that Cade Otton was just going to remain kind of parked in your tight end slot all year, and you felt good about it, and no reason to ever look at the waiver wire, we're probably not there because ball went all kinds of places last week. It was basically Mike Evans at the top of the receiving hierarchy, and then a whole bunch of guys with 1-2 opportunities. They still throw to the running backs, and they get a lot out of it. Obviously, Bucky Irving was great through the air last week. That's probably going to continue because the running backs are dangerous in this passing game. But yeah, I think it's a real concern. I have a bunch of rosters where I've been rolling out weird rosters in weird formats where I've been rolling out a couple of tight ends, and Cade Otton has been one of them. And I'm probably going to leave him on the bench in this one.
Well, it's worth noting if you do have to roll with Cade Otton, and I'm speaking to myself here in several spots because I'm going to have to roll with Cade Otton. If you just look at the Panthers, they're terrible against running backs. Obviously, they've allowed more fantasy points per game to running backs. That's just the way it's been all year. They've been pretty decent at limiting wide receiver production. I think J.C. Horn is rather quietly having a really nice year, and they're actually number one in points allowed to the tight end position. So if that structurally does kind of make sense with their defense, I don't think they're that great at linebacker. Their safeties are an issue, but their cornerbacks have played pretty well. So again, Andy, maybe I'm just talking cope to myself here, but that at least makes me feel a little bit better about the Cade Otton stuff.
No, I'm open to it. I'm open to it. You're maybe talking me into it because I don't have, the other tight end options that I have are not great. It's not like I'm talking about, I think I'll start Travis Kelce over him. I think I'll start George Kittle over him. I'm talking about some sketchy names.
Yeah. Just last note on this game, because I think this is a really nice smash spot for Bucky Irving. I think it's a really nice smash spot for even Rachaad White too. Mm-hmm. I mentioned several weeks ago on the podcast, Andy, that when we were drafting, and you weren't there, but because I was taking your spot at the Fantasy Football Expo, the Kings Classic draft, during that affair, I mentioned that I said and I think RotoPat might have been the only person that heard me say this, that I was like, Will Dissly's probably going to catch like 500 yards and 6 touchdowns in the Jim Harbaugh offense. And I said this on the pod a couple weeks ago, and I was like, I can't, it's probably like my best take all year that is the dumbest but best take all year, and it's not on any of the bajillion shows I do. It's a real shame. I also had another memory come back to me from that moment where RotoPat actually said, I think Bucky Irving's just like the best pick in fantasy this year. And I looked over at him kind of like, I don't think I said anything back to him. I just kind of looked at him like, what? Bucky Irving? And dude, he probably, shout out to Pat, again, who's not listening to this show, is not going to hear any of this. Didn't hear me mention the Will Dissly anecdote a week ago, is not going to hear me mention this here. But shout out to Pat for an incredible take. 2 things that 2 idiots said that should have been on podcasts.
One thing that I have learned over the years about Pat is often when he goes in on a take like that, and he will say some stuff during an auction or a draft, he almost never ends up with the guy. So Pat's Bucky Irving take is probably not reflected in his rosters. Like, he probably said it because in the moment he was like, oh yeah, somebody just took Bucky Irving and that should have been me. I've been thinking about it for 3 rounds and didn't do it. Yeah,
and also I can't remember if he said this because it's like a literal 8-hour affair between the snake draft and the salary cap draft. I don't remember which one he said it during, so I can't even heat check did he actually end up with Bucky Irving in either spot. So again, shout out to Pat for that, and shout out to Bucky Irving, who is going to end up being one of the better picks in fantasy football. Yeah. Let's get to your second burning question, Andy Behrens.
Yeah, it is whether or not this is the last stand for the Niners, basically, and who is even available on that roster this week against Buffalo. And I guess a follow-up to that would be, what the heck is wrong with Debo, if anything, because he's been pretty terrible since he slapped that long snapper. Last week, without Purdy, without Bosa, without Williams, the Niners were just not at all competitive against Green Bay, right? And it will not get any easier, obviously, against the Bills. If they slip to 5-7, you better win out, which seems impossible for this team, right? They have a remarkable number of just late, terrible, unnecessary losses this season. Purdy apparently did some light throwing on Monday, according to the coaching staff. He's going to have to do some pretty zesty throwing in a few days' time in order to beat Buffalo, right? I don't know where he is. We can't count on the Niners to say honest things about him, so that's a worry. And then again, Debo has 5 catches for 43 yards over his last 2 games. He had a brutal whiff against the Packers, so he is simply not playing well. And he's not they're not giving him any carries either. If you thought in a game with Brandon Allen that they were going to manufacture some touches for Debo Samuel, they did not.
I like that. Probably everybody else, Andy, has been, since the pneumonia or since this, that, and the other injury, Debo's been a little disappointing. You're like, no, since he open hand smacked his long snapper or whatever.
I guess he was hospitalized. Okay, I'll give you that.
Well, no, I'm not discrediting your theory here. I'm not saying that maybe isn't the moment when it all fell apart for Debo Samuel. Yeah, no, it's definitely that, and definitely it's either that or pneumonia. It's not the 500 hits that he's suffered during the course of his career and just his playing style that maybe has changed the outlook here. But you're so right. This is definitely it's not a loser leaves town because the Bills are going to be fine even if they somehow lost this game. They're a great team, but it's I personally already think it's over. I think the Niners are toast.
Yeah.
But this is if they lose this game, I really do think it's over because it's not as if the rest of the schedule is just smooth sailing. They get this game in Buffalo, which, by the way, in Buffalo, and the Bills are only 7-point home favorites in this game. The early line is 7 points. I think I might take Bills -7 in this game. Like they could easily win this one by double digits, especially if we get a Brandon Allen start on Sunday Night Football. Then they get your Bears in week 14, and I mean Caleb Williams is coming off a 6 touchdown performance. That's not an easy matchup by any means. They've got the Rams in week 15, the Dolphins, they've got the Lions, and then they finish in Arizona in week 18. That is not an easy schedule for the Niners here.
No, brutal schedule. And again, you pretty much have to win out. So you can feel good about the Bears on the schedule, I guess, but like the Niners can lose to anybody. We've seen them lose some games that just seemed wildly improbable already. And that's a gauntlet. Like this is really tough. So I tend to agree with you that it's probably over. And then what happens if it really is over, right? Like, is this one of those teams that we reach a point where like, okay, we gotta put Christian McCaffrey back in the holster. We gotta get a little more Jordan Mason out there because like it's, we're cooked. We're not that far, although the whole division is pretty close to 500, right? And Arizona coming back to the field probably helped a little bit. So the division is going to feel in play probably until the final couple of weekends of the season. So I guess that gives you hope if you're invested in Niners.
That's a good point. Yeah, I didn't even think about the fact that they might start pulling back on some of these injured players at some point this year because, God, no, I feel like very few teams have run this bad in terms of injuries this year. So I definitely think this is a big moment for the Niners. And yeah, you're still playing CMC. You're playing, I think, Juwan Jennings, although the upside is definitely just much more limited. Like when I said he was going to be a wide receiver 2 rest of the season, I still think he is going to rank around that area. It's just if it's Brandon Allen, not Brock Purdy, you're in a bit of a you're not playing Juwan Jennings essentially in that situation. And I don't think Debo is like a must start in fantasy. Dalton said it earlier this week that there's no player that when he opens up the consensus rankings that he is just immediately appalled by how highly they're ranked than Debo Samuel. And I feel like at this point, he is maybe a wide receiver 3.
Yeah, I think that's pretty generous too. I don't even think it's a conversation as to whether Juwan Jennings at this point deserves to be ranked over him. It's a question of how high we go on Jennings, not knowing the quarterback situation as of this moment, and then how low we go on Debo, right? Because sometimes you also like want to unfairly punish a player in the rankings, and I don't want to be there with Debo because he's certainly explosive enough at his best that he can make if you've got him buried in the 30s in the ranks, it can just look silly, right? Like we know that he can have a game in which he gets 5 carries and he gets 5 catches and he turns all that into 130 yards and 2 touchdowns. That is very much in play for Debo. It's just hasn't looked great over the last couple of weeks, and they're not going out of their way to get him the ball.
How generous of you to not want to punish a player in the rankings in Andy Behrens' fantasy rankings of all places.
I do it a fair amount. If I'm a little resentful.
All right, let's get to your third question here.
Yeah, this is how does Jaden Daniels and Cliff Kingsbury, for that matter, bounce back from the season's wildest loss, right, against Dallas? They are facing the NFL's top-ranked pass defense this week, at least in terms of yards against. Daniels, that game was weird for a million reasons, and he ended up finishing with a pretty good stat line, but it was really a journey to get to that stat line, right? Terry McLaurin had absolutely no impact on this game until he had a huge impact in the final minute. But the usage and this passing game's overall predictability, very much a concern, especially with you and I talked about it immediately following the game. There's no particularly threatening secondary receiving options in this offense. Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler both dealing with injuries, so a lot is going to be on Daniel's shoulders in this one. And again, Tennessee's defense allows only 6.5 yards per attempt on the season, just under 170 passing yards per game. They haven't given up a bunch of passing touchdowns, but this isn't some obvious, get right spot for Washington.
No, it's not, because Tennessee's defense is good, man. Like it's a really, really good quality unit. And the way that they harassed CJ Stroud in this last game is definitely on my mind. And especially when you look at the fact that, Jaden Daniels, among quarterbacks who have played a majority of their team's snaps since week 9. He is right up there with like Joe Flacco, Will Levis, and Geno Smith in terms of pressure to sack rate, pressure to sack ratio. He has been like, if you get pressure on him, he's going down. 1 of 9 against pressure against Dallas last week. I just worry about that with Jeffrey Simmons, with T'Vondre Sweat, and you mentioned obviously the fact we might not have either Robinson or Eckler in this game. And even with those guys, the run game has fallen off in Washington. Yeah. I think Cliff, and I've suddenly gone from being like a huge Cliff skeptic to kind of, I'm not saying I'm a Cliff apologist right now or anything like that, but I think he's become the target of most of the ire in this Washington situation with how things are falling off right now. And I'm not 100% sure that's all deserved. I think he did an admirable job to work around the talent issues on the offensive line and in the pass catching department earlier this year. The problem is, like, the course over a 17 game schedule, eventually, if you have a talent problem, that shows up. You can only coach around that so much. You can only duct tape and glue things together for so long. And I feel like this offensive line, we're starting to see the fact that, especially on the interior and at right tackle too, there are just some problems. And I think you're going against Simmons and Sweat. That feels pretty tough with this Titans defense here. So I'm not saying that we're just going to, we're panicking about the Washington offense, but I agree with you. This is a pretty critical spot to watch.
Yeah, I'm not panicking about it. And I don't mean to sound like I'm putting it all on Cliff necessarily, because again, I'm surprised that they did not add receiving talent at the deadline. I'm sure they were in on people. They had to have been close. But man, this is a team that if you just drop, Amari Cooper or DeAndre Hopkins, one of those guys in there, it all looks a whole lot better. I also just think, anytime we get single coverage on Terry McLaurin, that's, not to oversimplify, but that's probably where the ball's got to go, right? Like there's just not anybody else like him in this receiving core. And anytime we have opportunities, and we should be doing all that we can to create easy opportunities for McLaurin too, because like, again, the number 2 receiver on this team, and he's had a pretty heroic year given, age and fairly limited abilities at this stage. But the number 2 receiver on this team is Zach Ertz. It's very difficult to make a really strong case and bang the table for the idea that a team can make a deep postseason run with Zach Ertz as the number 2 receiving option.
Yeah, I think this is just one of those situations where Washington had this great success. They were truly the most efficient offense in the NFL to start this year. And now it's kind of like they're falling back a little. What's going wrong with the Washington offense? It's probably just that they're much better than they were, that we thought they'd be to start the season. They're just not quite the best offense in the league because Zach Ertz is a main player. Noah Brown is a main player. I think we're just running into some talent issues here. I still think Jaden Daniels is a fantasy starter. And when you can give him time and when you can get time against this Tennessee Titans defense, there are spots in the secondary that you can pick. I mean, Nico Collins was running wild against this secondary last week. I think Terry McLaurin's in a spot where he could have a pretty decent game here. So yeah, overall, I still think Jaden Daniels is a fantasy starter. I still think Terry McLaurin can get going in this game, but the overall efficiency of the offense, I do think is going to come down.
Yeah, agree with all that. And it's a really good point. Like if they just had some of these games at the start of the season, we wouldn't have been shocked, right? Yeah. Nobody had lofty expectations for this team. We just talked ourselves into it. And we talked ourselves into the idea that, Jaden's great and is going to be great and a really exciting player, but, probably not the finished product that maybe you thought he was 6 games into the season.
Yeah. And they're a very late bye team. They're on bye next week. So this is the last game they have before their bye week. All right. Let's move to the final question you've got here, Andy Behrens, which is maybe the one you milked a little bit, but that's fine.
Milked it a little bit, but it's also a player who influences a bunch of other players that we care about in fantasy. And the simple question is this the final game of the Aaron Rodgers era in New York? What a ride it's been, if this is it. Just to summarize some of the recent reporting on the Rodgers situation in case people haven't tracked it. And this is not just Ian Rappaport. This is The Athletic and others. Sounds like the ownership, sounds like Woody Johnson has maybe seen enough. In fact, maybe he had seen enough back in October when he first started lobbying to perhaps bench Rodgers, which is wild. I think at this point, the most surprising result would be for Rodgers to return to New York next year. It could be Tyrod Taylor time at almost any moment, it seems. If not this week, then I don't know, relatively soon, perhaps. Why does this matter? Well, Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson, and Breece Hall are all pretty essential players in fantasy, and they are tied to this mess right now. We're still starting all those guys. Man, Rodgers going to be 41 in like a couple days. Like a couple days after this pod comes out, Aaron Rodgers turns 41 years old. He's nobody's quarterback of the future. Very clearly not enjoying himself, has not been enjoying himself all season. No one is enjoying him. And just, man, feels like another lifetime ago when Rodgers remember when he was blowing off minicamp and everybody was like, oh, it's no big deal. He's Aaron Rodgers. It's going to be fine. Maybe not everybody. Maybe some people thought it was a big deal. And maybe that was also like, that was the first little warning shot that maybe everything wasn't perfect. Man, I got to think they're facing the Seahawks. You got to think Geno Smith would love to be the guy who effectively ends the season for the Jets, right? And slams the door on Rodgers. That's very much in play. So this game actually has quite a bit of entertainment value attached to it.
No, and it could be, I don't know, it could be a great fantasy performance for the Seattle Seahawks on the other side, man, because this Jets defense, they packed it in like a while ago.
Yes.
And I don't think coming off the bye, suddenly they're going to be re-energized. Like, oh, they fired Joe Douglas. It's crazy they fired Joe Douglas when he was on an expiring contract anyways. I mean, was it a mercy firing? That's funny, too, that you mentioned the reports about, oh, maybe it was Woody Johnson that like wanted to bench Aaron Rodgers because, look, I'm not going to step into like the arena of why it is this way with Rodgers, but we know he's like a pariah and people don't like him in the public space for some of the things that he believes and thinks. And, that's feel free to think however you want about that. But it's funny that I think because of that, people have tried to like get in the mind and like psychoanalyze Rodgers, where, oh, well, yeah, he's the master pulling the strings behind the scenes and all this stuff. Like he got Bob Saleh fired. He got Joe Douglas fired. He's done this. He's done this. He's orchestrated this trade for Devon. It's like, really? Well, the owner might have wanted to bench him in like week 5 or something like that. Yeah. It's just crazy. Maybe Rodgers actually doesn't have but believe me, this is not Rodgers. Like, I'm not being an apologist for Rodgers, certainly in this moment. But it's just funny. Like maybe he's just been caught up in the Jets show and the mess that franchise is as much as anybody. And nothing. You're right. It does seem fairly obvious now in hindsight that nothing good was going to come out of this situation. And man, talk about a look in the mirror moment for fantasy analysts. Like we really had 2 players from this team. And 2 guys who, by the way, actually have been fine in fantasy. We had 2 guys from this team ranked in like the top 12 overall players. Let's collectively decide to never do something like that again.
It was pretty easy to look at this roster though and be like, oh man, look at all these names. This is like a little mini Pro Bowl roster here. Like there, it's not like there wasn't talent on this team. A lot of it, of course, is what Aaron Rodgers is at this stage versus the version of Aaron Rodgers that may exist in your head from like his absolute peak. But yeah, we make this mistake all the time in all kinds of different sports where we don't exactly know what it's going to look like when all these personalities and all these talents have to actually, sync up and contribute to something greater than themselves, right? And this has just been an absolute show. This has been absolutely horrible. And at this point, I don't think there's much chance that Rodgers finishes the season as the starting quarterback, which is just a wild thing to say. I think you're in a super flex league. It's probably time to take a flyer on Tyrod Taylor. And I don't know, maybe Tyrod with Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams would be kind of fun.
I'm interested. I'm always interested in some Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod's like one of my favorite, weird backup quarterbacks. I'm a big Tyrod guy. So yeah, I'm down to see him throwing it to these guys. I think that would be an exciting way for the Jets to end their season. Well, not exciting for Jets fans, but exciting for the NFL landscape to just, let's put the Rodgers stuff aside and let's get Tyrod out there, maybe getting Garrett Wilson some career milestones by the end of the year. But yeah, last point on this game, Seahawks defense on my radar as a very, very improved unit coming out of their bye. So not that dismantling the Jets would be that big of an accomplishment. But if we get a big performance out of the Seattle defense against the Jets in their building, I do think it's time to kind of recalibrate, maybe past time to recalibrate expectations for the Seahawks defense, which has been very good of late. And certainly I want to do a show. I mentioned this earlier in the week. I want to do a show with Nate on the Fantasy Film Room next week, dissecting some of these defenses that we need to rethink like our expectations on. Seattle and Tennessee too, that we just talked about, are definitely among that group. All right, let's take our first break. We come back. We'll talk through some matchups that Andy says deserves your attention right after this. All right, Andy, we're back. 4 matchups that you say the people need to be paying attention to. Thanksgiving is over. Time to lock in. Let's pay attention to these 4 games here, starting with Arizona at Minnesota.
Yeah, we got a bunch of great games this week, and games that will answer a bunch of questions about a bunch of teams. This is a really fun slate. So Minnesota favored by 3.5 in this one. They're coming off an encouraging overtime win in which I say, they probably didn't intend to go to overtime against the Bears, but they needed a game where Sam Darnold played great and made huge throws in can't miss moments. And he did it against Chicago, right? It feels like he's pulled out of the nosedive that I think we were reasonably concerned about. He had a 2-game stretch in which he threw 5 interceptions, right? Looked a whole lot better last week. Arizona's offense, in contrast, just absolutely no-showed out of their bye. And we have to give some credit to Seattle's defense for that, of course. But man, they put up only 6 points. They put up 6 points at Seattle. Coming out of a bye. Kyler passed for 285 scoreless yards, basically half of it to Trey McBride, which, okay, that was fine, but we didn't get anything from anybody else. Arizona's defense was, again, pretty great and have now actually held each of their last 3 opponents to single-digit point totals. There was a pick 6 that Kyler threw last week that put it into double digits, but in terms of what the defense is giving up, it isn't anything over the past couple of weeks. Past month really. So Arizona's defense has been really good. The NFC West is wild. Arizona was a win away from really kind of taking control of the division, and now they're a second place team that is headed into a game in which they are not favored. Minnesota, again, really fun. I'm sure you dealt with some panic this week about Justin Jefferson. Not that anybody should be panicky about Justin Jefferson. That is some crazy recency bias. I think he's the wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 on the season. He's fine. He's about as good as it gets. So I wouldn't worry there. But Arizona's defense is legit. Minnesota's defense is all kinds of things. They'll turn you over, they'll put some heat on you, but they also, Caleb Williams got whatever he wanted in week 12 against Minnesota.
Yeah, the Vikings defense, definitely. I expected them to give Williams a lot more trouble than they did. That did not happen. And usually young quarterbacks and bad quarterbacks are just taken to the woodshed by Brian Flores. That did not happen with the Chicago Bears. And Kyler Murray, he's not a young quarterback and he's not a bad quarterback, but he's a tough quarterback to figure it out sometimes because he's just he's very he's just very volatile, I think. But this and so it's tough with that side of the ball. I just have no idea what to expect on a weekly basis with this Cardinals offense from a production standpoint. I know what they want to do. I have a good sense of what this offense is, and I think the offense overall is good. I just think sometimes we get brain fart games from Kyler Murray, and that's just that. And I think that's kind of what we got. I think the Seattle Seahawks threw them for a little bit of a loop in this past game. Yeah. So I'm not sure what to take about that from a matchup perspective. You can get this team on the outside from the perimeter perspective. So this would be a great game for them to try to activate some more Marvin Harrison stuff. This would be a great game for them to keep throwing the ball downfield to Michael Wilson. We'll see if they can pull it off. On the other side here, Andy, you're right to point out that the Cardinals defense is 4th in dropback success rate allowed since week 8. This defense has turned around. I'm not suddenly saying they're one of the best defenses in the league, but we used to look at them as, they're a total pushover matchup.
We were halfway through the season and they were giving up over 8 yards per attempt. They were a really, really friendly matchup for us.
Yeah, and now I'm not sure. That was a
little traffic kerfuffle out there. We have a truck driver who strongly agrees with my take.
He loved that take. Blare that horn for the Cardinals defense. Buda Baker's out there driving that truck blaring that horn out there right now. No, but you're right about this defense. It's definitely improved. It's turned around. So this game is one of the hardest ones to figure out. But for the most part, like obviously on the Viking side of things, you're going to play your guys here. You're playing Aaron Jones, you're playing Justin Jefferson, but Jordan Addison's usage is definitely something to monitor here because this is structurally a bit of a different defense, certainly different. We never see the Cardinals do what the Bears did to try to take away Justin Jefferson and really do that kind of stuff with like the hard man double coverage stuff that they did with Justin Jefferson. So I don't know that that's perfectly translatable here, but I don't know. Jonathan Gannon and Nick Rawls over there, they can throw some different stuff at you. So we'll see about that one. But one of the more interesting games between two teams that are NFC contenders here for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right to point out that we know exactly what to do with guys on the Minnesota side. They kind of start themselves. It's a little dicier on the Arizona side. And the other thing I haven't mentioned is where the hell did the run game go for Arizona last week in a game in which the run was always in play? Like that was a one score game. There were no points there. That was a one score game throughout. For that not to have been a pretty big James Conner game was a huge surprise.
Yeah, as the guy who drafted James Conner in our FFL primetime picks competition, yes, I am equally as befuddled as you are as to where the hell the James Conner stuff was in this last game. But I think that is a big credit to Seattle. And Minnesota's run defense is statistically it's a fine unit, but they are not capable, in my opinion, of what we saw Seattle do to this front. Because I think just Leonard Williams and those guys dominated that game. I don't think we're going to see that from Minnesota in this one. So hopefully this is a spot where James Conner can get back on track. It just felt like, and I think this Cardinals team has felt pretty well coached and prepared for most things throughout the course of the season.
Yeah,
it felt like they got last week especially on the offensive side of the ball. I don't think they were prepared for what Mike McDonald threw at them from a defensive perspective. So we'll see. Brian Flores can also throw quite a lot at you in this one, but I bet they'll be a little bit better prepared for this one. Let's move to another big conference game here between the Chargers, Falcons. We mentioned this earlier with the Buccaneers, Andy. Obviously a big week for the NFC South here.
Yeah. So Atlanta coming off a bye, and the bye was preceded by a pair of losses. And they were not even remotely competitive against Denver just 2 weeks ago. Like, definitely did not look like a playoff team a couple of weeks ago. The Chargers just had their win streak halted by the Ravens pretty emphatically on Monday night, I would say. LA has been conceding rushing yards all year, and that shockingly turned out to be a poor approach against Derrick Henry. It could also be a poor approach against Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier, right? Like the Atlanta, if they decide they just want to run it down your throat, they can do that. J.K. Dobbins lost to a knee injury on Monday night, and like Gus Edwards, a very capable replacement for him, but he is not necessarily as much of a multi-purpose threat as Dobbins has been this year. I don't think you're quite as confident throwing to Gus out of the backfield, so that's a little bit problematic. Atlanta's defense has not been exceptional really in any area, so it's a good spot pretty much for all of your Chargers, I would say. The Chargers defense still looking really good on paper, but they have given up some point totals over the last couple of weeks to good teams.
Yeah, they really have. And obviously a lot of it has been rushing production too. Of course, that's going to happen when you play the Ravens. But since week 8, they're 30th in rushing EPA allowed are the Chargers. So to me, if I'm Zach Robinson, I'm Raheem Morris, I'm coming into this game and saying, how many times can we get the ball in Bijan Robinson's hands? And even like sprinkle in a little bit of Tyler Algier too, because I think that the Chargers have really struggled defending some of these more downhill runs because they just don't dedicate any extra bodies to the run. Philosophy-wise, they play a lot of coverage on the back end. We know they play almost more two high safeties than anybody else in the league. And because of that, I think that's going to be a really interesting matchup for these pass catchers, right? And it's tough to calibrate the Falcons pass catchers just because, you know, they both play these really. They both get a lot of slot work, although Drake London typically when he's in the slot, they try to get him the ball. So you'd imagine that this can be a big Drake London game. But to me, Andy, this should be a moment when Bijan Robinson touches the ball, 20, 25, 30 times.
Oh, man, you're really speaking to me there. I hope that's the
case.
Me too.
I need it. I need it too. I'm also for transparency's sake, I need it as well.
I need that. So I would, if we could pencil in 25 touches right now for Bijan Robinson, I am taking that. I do feel like we'll probably see, they got away from this against Denver The whole Denver game got away from Atlanta, right? But not a lot of Tyler Algier in that one. We could get more of him here. They should. Again, it is definitely the way to approach the Chargers defense is just to bang it into him on the ground. Robinson, we've talked about it throughout the year. I don't know. He's been one of those guys, along with Saquon and Bucky Irving, who are just among my favorite players to watch, and they're able to extract themselves from situations that I don't think any other back can get out of. He's really been fun, and man, if he does get 25 touches, then our RB1 overall is definitely in play.
Yeah, and just looking at these Falcons pass catchers between Darnell Mooney, who did have a little bit of an injury before the bye, so that's at least worth monitoring. They're both actually pretty productive against too high coverage. 2.71 yards per route run for Darnell Mooney, 2.2 yards per route run for Drake London. So both good numbers there. They just do it completely differently, whereas Drake London leads the team in catches against too high, which makes sense. You've got the middle of the field's open. It's all these Drake London in breakers. We're hitting those over and over again. But as you'd imagine, too, Darnell Mooney has the much higher target depth against too high coverage, because God bless Kirk Cousins. If he likes to look and Darnell Mooney's running like a deep out or a deep corner, he will throw it between the low corner and the high safety. If that look is open there on the boundary, he is 100% taking those shots. And he's done. I mean, Mooney has come down with those plays. So I actually think both these guys are fantasy starters. They've been fantasy starters all year, but I think they're both starters against this Chargers defense. Even if I think they should try to get the ball to Bijan Robinson as many freaking times as they can here. Let's talk Chargers here. You mentioned the Gus Edwards thing. He probably, if I had to guess today, is going to end up being the starter for the Chargers, which we haven't gotten like just off the waiver wire starting running back in fantasy very many times this year, because that position's been pretty healthy. We might have one in Gus Edwards here. In the passing game, Andy, this Falcons defense stinks. I don't think they're a good unit at all. This should be a good bounce back spot for the Chargers overall. And can we please get 10? Like, let's just to quote the great Ian Hardis, because he always says this about every player in the NFL. Like, let's just get 10 targets to Ladd McConkey and see what happens. Like, right? Like, can we? Yeah. Would that be so hard? Because I almost got to a point where I felt bad for Quentin Johnson on that Monday night game, because he was just so clearly in his head. And like, I've seen enough Josh Palmer targets. This should be a good spot for Ladd. Hopefully he's a little bit healthier, and Justin Herbert and Gus Edwards if he gets to start here.
Yeah, Ladd was great against the Ravens. Ladd's been great all year. He's been a really, really fun watch, and couldn't agree with that more, right? Like, let's see what a dozen targets might look like for Ladd McConkey. He certainly seems like he's earned that sort of usage. Still think Herbert's been playing really well, and there is this surprising rushing element to his game that has really been surfacing over the last month and a half. So that's fun as well. He's a very strong play. I think you got to think of him as a pretty much, I don't know, top 8-ish, top 10-ish, certainly fantasy quarterback going forward. Again, maintaining the in many respects the most efficient season of his career.
Yeah, Falcons definitely a friendly matchup for pretty much whatever you want. Okay, let's take our final break. Then we'll get to the last two matchups and our keys to winning players for this week right after this. All right, we're back. Let's talk through the last two matchups here. Andy Behrens, starting with Eagles at Ravens.
This one's just great, right?
Yeah.
Like this one's just super entertaining. Huge measuring stick game for two obvious contenders. Philly's defense has been among the stingiest in the league in terms of yards against. They're coming off a pair of games against very legit offenses too. So, you know, if you thought it was some accident of quality of competition, no, that is not the case. They're just very good. Baltimore's defense has been somewhat more generous, bottom third in the league overall, particularly generous against the pass. I think, you know, this is one of those games where you're just starting all your dudes, but Devontae Smith, the big injury question mark here, he missed last week's game with a hamstring issue. This feels like an all hands on deck situation for each team. So hopefully he's good to go. The game also features the two most valuable and sort of season defining running backs in fantasy football this year, in Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry, 1-2 in scrimmage yards on the season. Basically, this game has everything.
Yeah, and like there's not too much analysis I think that the Eagles side needs. I mean, you're starting all your guys there. And I think if Devontae Smith is playing in this game, I'm probably greenlighting him right into my starting fantasy lineup, especially because he probably would run some of his routes over that middle of the field area that I think Baltimore has really struggled to defend this year. Predictably, of course, Ladd McConkey had that big game against them. That's kind of exactly what it was Ladd and Will Dissly in terms of number one and number two in receiving yards. That was about to be expected. So I think this could be a good spot. Even like, I know Dallas Goedert's just not involved, but he could even potentially have a moment in this game. On the Ravens side, I think is a little bit more interesting just from the pass catching department. I don't know. God, this Eagles defense is so good, Andy. This Eagles defense is so good. And it's not too surprising that Puka was the one who got home against them last week for two reasons. One, he's playing at a really high level, man. I know that sounds like, oh, well, great analysis about the guy who broke the rookie receiving yardage record last year. No, I mean, I think he has leveled up as a player. I think he's even better this year than he was as a rookie. And, I think it was worth wondering because if you're just like a draft capital snob and you don't actually watch the games, it's worth wondering, I guess, if he could have been a fluke. But I think he's leveled up. So there's that. He's also the guy that they move around, like they do so much with him in motion to get him the ball. And Cooper Kupp is just like, okay, when you win from the slot, we'll get you the ball, which is why I think he didn't really have he scored the touchdown in complete and utter garbage time. But before that wasn't really a factor. So that's why I'm trying to say that, because I can't really figure out the Ravens wide receivers here. Bateman had the touchdown against the Chargers because Lamar's another guy that when he sees two high safeties, he will throw it over the coverage and he'll throw it to Bateman down there. Whereas Flowers is the move around guy. So I can't really figure out which of these two receivers, or if it's a Mark Andrews game, really benefits against this Eagles defense.
Yeah, I think you saw some stuff against the Eagles defense from like Matt Stafford, who is just capable of throws that not very many guys are capable of, and Puka, who's capable of making catches that not very many guys are capable of. And I think it takes that level of talent to really break loose against this Eagles defense. I think it exists on the Ravens side, but maybe not at the level of Kupp and Nakua. So that's a concern. That Bateman catch on Monday night was awesome. I'm a sucker for any situation in which somebody hauls in a catch in which they are being interfered with. So that was just great,
bro. Especially
really,
when it's
really
Rashad Bateman, because I mean, it's just been, there's so many. Not as much this year, but in previous years, just crushing moments when, I mean, shoot, even that game against Cleveland when he lost the ball in the sun where he's just wide open, he doesn't catch, and it's just, well, great, rip my heart out, and he's never going to get thrown to again the rest of the game. So for Bateman particularly to come up with that catch while he's getting interfered with, that was big.
Yeah, no, that was awesome. And they're gonna move Flowers around enough, and he's been productive enough this season that I think we got to play him. Although I think I have him on the fringes of the top 20, and I've had him pretty comfortably parked in the teens for the past several weeks. So it's a thing. Philly's defense is really, really good, and it is a concern. But this is just such a fun game overall. Also, the total is huge in this one. For considering the quality of at least one of the defenses involved in this thing, the total in this game is 50.5.
Which is exactly what happened last week with the Rams and Eagles, and I was suspicious about that total. And ultimately, they ended up getting there, I think, by the end of it because of that last Cooper Kupp touchdown. But it's just tough because the Eagles can drum up 30+ points on you, and then if you can get over on their defense even a little bit, they probably will meet that total. But that is at least interesting to consider because that Eagles defense is just so good. Okay, let's get into your final matchup here. AFC North divisional matchup, Steelers at Bengals.
Yeah, Cincinnati favored by a field goal as of this moment, which, for a team that doesn't win a lot of games, that's something. Classic AFC North rivalry game. And sometimes, as we have learned, those do not unfold in the most fantasy friendly of ways. That is a slight concern here. Cincinnati pretty much, we talked about this with the Niners. Cincinnati pretty much can't lose again. They already have 7 losses. Maybe they can afford to split with Pittsburgh and still make some noise, but I would not advise it. They should probably just go ahead and win out. Every remaining game on Cincinnati's schedule is winnable. So they can make things really fun down the stretch. That's a real possibility. This game features the overall QB3, the wide receiver 1, the wide receiver 20, the RB 19, the RB 23. So it has a lot of fantasy juice to it. it's another George Pickens game. That's always fun to watch. I don't know if he's the worst great player in the NFL or if he's the best bad player, but he's a total party, and I am really enjoying his season.
I love the way you described George Pickens there. I think he's just like the wildest player in the NFL.
Yes.
And whether you want to take that good and bad, whatever, I think he's having a great year. It just, he's had some bizarre moments along the way. And yeah, I mean, this game is interesting because the Steelers defense is another one that I really love, really have a lot of respect for, but I think they have given teams like Washington trouble because they're so good against scrambling quarterbacks, and the way TJ Watt just plays so far out on the edge, and obviously the way Cam Hayward is playing this year is super impressive. They can particularly give those quarterbacks a lot of trouble. I do wonder about a guy like Burrow, who's moved a little bit better this year than in previous years, but more of just a drop back guy, get the ball out to all these different playmakers. I wonder if there's a bit of more of a matchup advantage to Cincinnati on that one. And just Chase Brown being an answer against pressure has been so huge for this team, and just being and Joe Burrow just willing to take that check down, and Brown being able to do stuff with the ball when he gets it in his hands. I feel like there is actually a pretty decent matchup here for Cincinnati if they can protect Joe Burrow, which is always the big question.
Yeah, and I didn't really think of Pittsburgh's defense as being all that vulnerable until the Browns game, which was a delight of a game, right? A great one from Jameis. But there's a lot of weapons on the Cincinnati side, especially when T. Higgins is healthy. That is a really, really dangerous team, and it's a good call out on Chase Brown, who you could see it last year when Joe Burrow was not on the field. You could just see what a weapon Chase Brown could be in the screen game and in the check down game, and man, has that proven to be the case. He's been really good. Oftentimes, though, Cincinnati just can't stop anything, and so they end up in these 33-30 type of games. And I don't think this is going to go that route, but I do think Pittsburgh has enough juice on offense that if they have to win this as like a 30-27, 27-24 type of game, I do think they have that much talent.
Yeah, and Pittsburgh, they're just in such a good spot against this Bengals defense, as you mentioned. It's worth noting that Najee Harris, I think, has played really well this year, but the touches are definitely getting split up. 48.1% of the snaps for Najee Harris the last month, 44.9% for Jaylen Warren. I think Warren has started to really heat up. Now that I think he's healthier, he's played a lot better. So you probably shouldn't have to do it when everybody's out there. Nobody's on bye this week. You probably shouldn't have to start him as like a flex or anything like that. But if you have to do it, this is the type of matchup where I could see Jaylen Warren getting home.
Oh, that's a really good call, because I don't think it's really until the last couple games that Jaylen Warren has looked like Warren, right? Like he's dealt with a couple of pretty significant injuries this year, and it's really limited him, and didn't have a lot of juice earlier in the season. And Najee's played great, by the way. Like Najee's played like legit, it was a little bit quiet last week in a matchup that we might have felt good about, but he's played really well. Like all the underlying numbers look really good. Like it has not just been pure volume. So both of those guys really talented. And I think Warren, over just these last couple games is looking like his old self.
Love it. All right. Let's wrap the show as we always do here on our weekly preview. Let's toss it to our keys to winning, presented by Toyota, the official automotive partner of the NFL. And as it always is here in week 13, what we want you to do, the key to winning, is picking the right player for your flex spot, which is especially challenging because, as I mentioned, we have all the teams available. There's no teams on bye, so we got to be choosy with these flex players. Andy Behrens, give me your pick for who's your key to winning player here in week 13.
Man, I'm so excited about Tank Bigsby. Maybe I shouldn't be this excited about a Jacksonville Jaguar, but this man entered the week available in over 60% of Yahoo leagues, largely because he'd been dealing with an ankle issue. His team was coming off a bye. His team is the Jaguars. That's a concern. He's averaging 5.5 yards per carry on the season, better than 4.3 yards after contact per attempt, which is ridiculous. That's the best in the league. Bigsby has also ranked among the NFL leaders in missed tackles, and he doesn't even have 100 carries on the season. So he's just been absolutely fantastic. About to face a Houston run defense that was just roasted by Tony Pollard, so they're gettable. If Jacksonville can just keep this thing in neutral game script, Bigsby is going to be a huge problem for the Texans.
Yeah. If. That's a pretty big if. But then again,
It's a big if.
Then again,
I'm not saying it's a small if.
Then again, the Houston Texans have been weird to read on their side of it. So I can see this being a Tank Bigsby type of game, the type of game script he needs. My pick, my keys to winning player this week is Jacoby Myers, Las Vegas Raiders wide receiver. Man, Myers' opportunity has just been so good of late. And Andy, nobody wants to start him. He's only started in 47% of Yahoo leagues right now, which is crazy given the production that he's given people of late. Obviously, monster week last week in week 12, but this is not a fluke. Since week 8, he's got a 22% target share of the Raiders offense. Obviously, Brock Bowers is a little bit higher, but only by 0.6. Like, Bowers has been great, but Myers has been right there in terms of production in some of these games. They get the Chiefs this week. Obviously, the Chiefs are a challenging defense. Aiden O'Connell might be is going to be the quarterback back under center this week. We don't quite know what that means, but O'Connell is aggressive. He's willing to sling it, especially over the middle where Myers does most of his work. And we know the Chiefs defense, Andy, it's mostly been vulnerable to slot receivers and tight ends. So of course Bowers can have a big moment here, but Jacoby Myers is a guy that will move into the slot sometimes and has a history playing in that position. So I think Jacoby Myers is a wide receiver 3 bare minimum this week, and somebody I think you can start here in week 13.
Yeah, I love that call. People shy away from the Chiefs, but it is a good spot for him. And it's one of those offenses where there's only a couple guys that we got to think about, and all the volume goes there.
If Bryce Young can have the best game of his career against the Kansas City Chiefs, why can't Aiden O'Connell give us functional football play against Kansas City Chiefs? What a great way to end it. Talking about Aiden O'Connell here on the Week 13 preview. Andy, appreciate the hell out of you. I hope you have a good rest of your week before we get into week 13 this Sunday. You were right. You got me pretty excited about this slate of games here.
It's a great slate. It was hard to narrow it down to just 4 games. There's a lot of good stuff on the schedule here.
A lot of good stuff from Andy Behrens on this show. That is going to do it for us today. Thanks again to Toyota, the official automotive partner of the NFL. Next time you hear from us, week 13 Sunday will be in the books, and Andy will be right back here with me to break it all down. Until then, we are out.